Following the British success in North Africa against the Italians in 1940, Winston Churchill, believing that there would be little chance of an Italian counterattack, transferred a significant portion of the most experienced British and Commonwealth troops to Greece to help counter the German and Italian invasion. Meanwhile, the 7th Armoured Division was transferred to the Nile Delta. These experienced units were replaced by inexperienced troops. In the meantime, Mussolini had requested help from his German ally. The Italians had also dispatched several large motorised and armoured units to North Africa. On the 8th of January, the Germans dispatched the Luftwaffe's Fliegerkorps 10 from Norway to Sicily. They began attacking Allied shipping destined for the Libyan port of Benghazi. This threat forced the British to resupply its forward units in Libya from Tobruk, which was more than 450 miles away. The Germans quickly assembled a small expeditionary force whose lead elements arrived in Tripoli in February 1941. This, later named the Afrika Korps by Hitler, was placed under the command of Erwin Rommel, who made his reputation as an aggressive commander during the invasion of France. Although Rommel had just been ordered to reinforce the Italians and to block British attempts to drive them out of Africa, when the British did not continue their advance, he sent out an armoured reconnaissance, which discovered that the British defences were weak. This armoured reconnaissance soon developed into an offensive at El Agheila in March. Near the end of March, General O'Connor was replaced by Lieutenant General Sir Philip Meem as commander of the Western Desert Force. The continuing German attack captured Benghazi on April the 3rd. O'Connor was sent back to the front as an advisor to General Meem. A major setback befell the British as both generals were captured by the Germans in an unescorted staff car on April the 6th. Rommel continued to drive east and surrounded Tobruk on April the 10th. Without the strength to take the port, he left a siege force of mostly Italian units and continued his drive to the Egyptian border. On April the 14th, Rommel reached Sollum and then took the strategically important Al-Fayh Pass. However, Rommel had overstretched his supply lines, which forced him to halt and reinforce these as defensive positions. The German High Command became increasingly concerned about Rommel's offensive and his failure to take Tobruk. They sent General Frederick von Paulus to North Africa to assess the situation and bring Rommel back under control. Von Paulus reported back to Berlin that Rommel was in an exposed position and was short of both fuel and ammunition. This report was intercepted by the British using Ultra, from which Churchill wrongly concluded that Rommel was in a very weak position. He began pressurising General Wavell to urgently conduct a counterattack. Before a counterattack could take place, Wavell wanted to regain control of Al-Fayh Pass. So on the 15th of May, he launched Operation Brevity under the command of Brigadier General William Gott, which secured the pass and Fort Capuzzo. Rommel immediately counterattacked, forcing the British to withdraw from Fort Capuzzo the next day. By May the 27th, the Germans had recaptured Al-Fayh Pass. Unable to advance any further because of lack of supplies, Rommel again dug in and fortified his position. Under increased pressure from Churchill, Wavell launched his major offensive, Operation Battle Axe, on June the 15th, with the objective of relieving the siege at Tobruk. Starting with a frontal attack on the Sollum Al-Fayh Pass area. The Germans stopped the British by using their 88mm anti-aircraft guns as anti-tank guns. Operation Battle Axe was over by June the 17th, by which time Wavell had lost 91 tanks. Following the failure of Operation Battle Axe, Churchill replaced General Wavell on June the 21st with General Claude Auchinleck. General Alan Cunningham was was given command of the Western Desert Force, recently renamed the British Eighth Army. Auchinleck resisted Churchill's constant pressure for an immediate counterattack. The British launched Operation Crusader on November the 18th, with the objective of bypassing Axis defences on the Egyptian-Libyan border to defeat their armoured units and to relieve the siege at Tobruk. At the start of the British offensive, the Axis had approximately 119,000 men and 414 tanks. The British had approximately 118,000 men and 738 tanks. The British 13 Corps began Operation Crusader by attacking the Halfaya Pass, with 30 Corps sweeping around Rommel's southern flank to attempt to reach Tobruk. 30 Corps reached Sidi Rezea, 20 miles southeast of Tobruk, where, after a series of fierce tank battles on November the 22nd and 23rd, Rommel swept behind the British as he tried to relieve the Axis forces at Halfaya Pass and at the same time cut off the British advance. With increased tank losses, General Cunningham wanted to halt the advance. General Auchinleck disagreed and immediately replaced him with Major General Neil Ritchie. General Ritchie continued to press the attack, and on the 29th of November they broke through to Tobruk. By the 7th of December, Rommel began withdrawing his forces westward. Following his defeat during Operation Crusader, Rommel continued his retreat westward until he reached Alageila on January the 6th, 1942. Although Operation Crusader was a victory for the British, they were unable to exploit it fully due to a lack of reinforcements. To add to Rommel's problems, during November 1941, he lost 62% of his supplies en route to the RAF. The German High Command reacted by transferring Frigga Corps 2 from the Soviet Union to Sicily. They also sent 10 U-boats into the Mediterranean. As a result, by December 1941, Rommel's supply situation dramatically improved, with shipping losses dropping to 18%. Meanwhile, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor resulted in the British moving forces from North Africa to India and Singapore. This improved Rommel's supply situation still further, and by January 1942, his shipping losses were below 1%. Rommel was ready to return to the offensive. On January the 21st, 1942, Rommel launched his offensive and quickly drove the British back almost 300 miles. He captured Benghazi on the 29th of January and continued to drive east, reaching Gazala on February the 4th. Here he was halted by the 8th Army's defensive line between Gazala and Ben Haim. For the next 4 months, both sides positioned themselves either side of the Gazala line while building up their strength. On May 26th, Rommel launched Operation Veneza against the Gazala line. Although both forces were roughly equal in strength, Rommel's concentrated armour swept around the Free French Brigade at Ben Haim and turned north, cutting across the Allies' rear. Meanwhile, a further Axis attack in the north pinned down the Allied forces there. By May 28th, the Axis armoured units behind the Allied lines were in trouble. Rommel had lost more than 1/3 of his tanks, while the remainder were running short of fuel and ammunition. On May the 30th, Rommel consolidated his armour in a defensive position that became known as the Cauldron. On the 5th and the 6th of June, Rommel successfully beat off a series of piecemeal British counterattacks. On June the 10th and 11th, the Axis finally drove the Free French forces out of Bir Hakeim, and on June the 11th, Rommel's panzers broke out of the Cauldron. The 8th Army once more started to fall back towards the Egyptian border. On June the 15th, the German tanks reached the coast, and Rommel shifted his attention to Tobruk. Tobruk fell on June the 21st, and the Axis forces captured 2.5 million gallons of much needed fuel, as well as 2,000 wheeled vehicles.